I always thought betrayal would come with fireworks or fistfights, the angry words and shattered plates you see in movies. But now I know it happens quietly, in lingering looks and silences that last a second too long. The moment I realized my wife, Helen, was in love with someone else, it was something as banal as sitting at our dinner table, watching her text, and seeing her smile, really smile, for the first time in months. But the smile wasn't for me. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Ours wasn't a perfect marriage, but I always believed we were fighting the same battles, rowing the same leaky boat that is adult life. I'd met Helen in college, the sort of whirlwind romance where everything is heightened. She was sharp, impossibly beautiful, and never let anything stand in her way. After graduation, we settled into a small house in the suburbs, trading late nights for job interviews and mortgage rates. Somewhere between her getting promoted at the firm and me working overtime at the auto shop, something fractured. Not broken, at least not yet, but bent in ways I couldn't fix. Helen had always been the ambitious one, charging ahead while I put in steady, reliable hours. We'd laugh about our differences over cheap wine on Sundays. But laughter felt rarer these days, replaced by shallow conversations and the glow of her phone in bed each night. I told myself it was the stress, her job, my long shifts, saving for our daughter's braces. But sometimes, denial is softer than truth. That night, after she finished texting and cleared the plates without a word, the sense of wrongness settled over me like a fever. All through Ava's bedtime routine, Helen hummed a tune I'd never heard her sing. I noticed she wore perfume, the kind she only used on date nights, before those stopped happening. Later in bed, she rolled away from me, clutching her phone to her chest while I lay staring at the ceiling, a question forming in my throat: who was she texting? The first red flag, I told myself, was probably nothing. But then came others: a lipstick stain on her coffee cup that looked too fresh for me, a receipt from a steakhouse we'd never set foot in, calls screened with too much haste. One Sunday, I took Ava to the park and came back early. I found Helen in the backyard, talking low-voiced to our neighbor, Rob, the tone too familiar, laughter too easy. I'd known Rob and his wife Jenny since they moved in 3 years ago. He was the sort you'd trust with a spare key, or your secrets. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia doesn't explain whispered conversations that stop when you enter a room, or how Helen ended weekend brunches with Jenny altogether, always pleading tiredness. I started piecing things together. Helen grew more distant, Rob's truck sat outside their house more often late at night, even when Jenny was away for work. Our daughter, Ava, started coming home with stories of Uncle Rob, buying her ice cream and helping her with her bike, things Helen used to do with her. I wanted to confront Helen. Instead, I did what I always do, kept my head down and hoped the universe would realign itself. But it never did. The proof finally came on a Tuesday. I'd been working a half shift, killing time at the bus stop, when I saw Helen's car parked outside a motel on the edge of town. It was unmistakable, olive green, with the cracked taillight I'd promised to fix. Rob's truck was in the next space. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, watching the blinds flutter in one upstairs window. Eventually they emerged, Helen's hair tousled, Rob grinning. They kissed before getting into their separate cars, Helen checking her phone before she pulled away. It's a strange thing, watching your life implode in real time. It feels almost detached. I drove home, picked up Ava from school, and acted like nothing had changed. But inside, something cold and determined was settling in. Grief is exhausting, but rage is invigorating. Maybe that's why people say revenge is sweet. I didn't want to scream, smash dishes, or start a fight that would traumatize Ava. I wanted Helen to feel the same isolation I'd felt, surrounded by suspects and half-truths. More than anything, I needed her to see herself, her choices, laid bare. First step: gather more proof. I became two people: the quiet husband, taking care of Ava and pretending everything was fine, and the investigator, digging through phone bills, scanning text logs, setting up a cheap recording app on a second phone hidden in the laundry basket. It took only 3 days to piece together a web of late-night calls, work emergencies, and calendar events labeled "client." Most damning was a string of texts from Rob: "Can't wait to see you again." And Helen's reply: I need you. It would have been easier if she was cruel about it. But reading their texts, I realized she was just lonely, searching for something I could no longer give her, something I hadn't even realized was missing. That almost hurt more than the affair. I knew confronting Helen in private would only lead to lies. I wanted her to face the reality she'd built, no shortcuts, no easy exits. So I began laying out my plan. Jenny, Rob's wife, had noticed things too. I reached out under the pretense of swapping weekend playdates for the kids. When we met at the park, I saw the tiredness around her eyes, the suspicion she'd never given voice to. She confessed her fears over lukewarm coffee, saying Rob seemed distracted lately. I told her what I knew and watched the color drain from her cheeks. We decided, painful as it was, to get proof together. We installed a basic camera in Rob's garage, the place Helen and Rob had started sneaking to on weekday afternoons. I left one of Ava's jackets, by accident, on Rob's porch, and when Helen texted that she was picking it up, I sat at my desk and waited. 2 hours later, Jenny sent a video, Helen and Rob, arms wrapped around each other, sharing a kiss that suggested this had been going on a lot longer than I wanted to admit. We finally had undeniable proof. Jenny and I coordinated carefully. We planned a family barbecue, inviting both families under the guise of patching things up after a busy year. I spent the next week living as if every day wasn't building toward this one, forcing myself to act normal for Ava's sake, even apologizing to Helen for being distant lately. She nodded, expression unreadable, texting under the table. The day of the barbecue, the weather was unseasonably warm. Kids shrieked on the grass, neighbors mingled, and the smell of charcoal filled the air. I spent the afternoon watching Helen and Rob carefully, noting how they avoided eye contact, the charged silences between them. Jenny smiled through gritted teeth, pouring drinks and making small talk. When everyone had eaten and settled with drinks in hand, Jenny stood and offered a toast to love and honesty. Her voice didn't shake once. Then, in front of the crowd, friends, neighbors, even our daughter, Jenny turned to Rob and asked, "Anything you want to tell me?" Rob, clueless, just laughed. That's when I connected my phone via Bluetooth to the speakers, hitting play on the audio, Helen and Rob professing their love in the garage, whispering plans, arranging motel meetups. The silence was immediate. Helen's face crumpled, Rob stared at the ground, and the picnic table groaned as people shifted away from them. Jenny took Ava's hand and led her to the house, shielding her before she could process too much. Rob tried to stammer an explanation, but no one would meet his eyes. Helen turned to me, tears streaking her face, whispering, "You didn't have to do this." I remember saying, evenly, "But you did." I watched the truth settle over her like a shroud. There's an ugliness to revenge, even when it's justified. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread through the neighborhood, secrets whispered at mailboxes, sympathy texts that always felt hollow. Rob moved out within days, couch surfing while Jenny began divorce proceedings. Helen stayed at her sister's, only coming over to see Ava. The hardest part was explaining to my daughter why things were changing, choosing words that kept her innocence intact. You'd expect satisfaction, a triumphant vindication, a restored sense of justice. But mostly I felt hollow, drained. Helen apologized, eventually, but the words felt weightless. There's no reset button for trust. I met Jenny for coffee to thank her, but the gratitude couldn't mask how much life we'd all lost in the explosion of truth. I learned that revenge doesn't heal. If anything, it's a mirror, forcing you to stare at the scars left behind. I did what I needed to do, yes, to show Helen, Rob, and maybe myself that some boundaries are worth defending. But Ava still cried herself to sleep on nights when the house felt too quiet, and I found myself haunted by what-ifs. What if I'd tried harder, listened more, noticed sooner? Now, every morning is quieter. I make Ava breakfast, pack her lunch myself, take her to school. In those small rituals, I find a kind of peace. I'm not naive anymore, I see how fragile things are, how easy it is for love to curdle into something sharp. Trust, once broken, doesn't knit itself back together. But I'm trying to teach my daughter that truth matters. That honesty, painful as it is, can sometimes spare you deeper wounds. People tell me I was brave, or unforgiving, or wise. The truth is simpler, I was hurt, and I wanted the world to know I hadn't deserved it. Maybe that makes me small. But as I sit at the same kitchen table, sunlight slanting through the window, I realize I have to live with the story I wrote for all of us. Not as a victim, not as a hero, just as a man who finally saw things as they were, and fought not to be eaten alive by silence.